He wasn't supposed to rest his head on a human's lap. He wasn't supposed to carry around old blankets like comfort objects or fall asleep with one paw gently curled over someone's chest. But there he was. A 25-pound bobcat named Ash, sprawled across a woman's couch, purring like a distant thundercloud, his breath warm and steady against the fabric of her flannel shirt. The evening snow pressed gently against the window pane, and the dim light of a wood stove flickered across the wooden floor. Outside, the wind sang across the ridgeline, but inside it was all stillness, all breath. Ash's old blue blanket was tucked under his chin, its edges frayed from years of dragging. His tail twitched in slow motion, responding to a dream only he understood. And Dana Holt, 42 years old, eyes lined with time and tiredness, just watched him. Her fingers rested lightly on his thick fur, moving only when he shifted in his sleep. Her heart knew this moment was impossible. And yet, here they were. 3 years earlier, she would have laughed at the idea. A bobcat? Sleeping like a child against her ribs? No chance. But life, especially the kind that starts with snow and grief, has its own strange paths. The call came on a brittle February morning, just before dawn. Dana had been up late the night before, tending to a red fox recovering from a leg wound, so the phone's buzz shook her from the edge of dream and exhaustion. The voice on the other end was worn and low. "Dana? It's Tom Becker. You still help wild ones? I think I got one here, barely breathing. Bobcat kitten, I think. Real small. Mom's dead up by mile marker 12, right near that curve. This one won't make it through another hour." Dana didn't ask questions. She was already pulling on thermals and boots, keys clutched in one hand, coffee left untouched on the counter. The drive up toward the edge of Flathead Forest was slow and cruel. Ice on the curves, visibility next to nothing. But when she turned onto Tom's old access road, she saw him standing in a cloud of his own breath, a bundled figure in worn Carhartt and a grief-heavy face. "He's in the crate," Tom said, pointing to an old dog kennel lined with hay. I didn't know what else to do. Dana knelt. What she saw inside stopped her breath. A tiny bobcat, maybe 3 weeks old, spotted fur soaked and stiff, ears pinned flat, eyes only half open. He was trembling in a way that wasn't movement. It was just life refusing to let go. Dana reached in and lifted the tiny body. It felt too cold, too light, too quiet. But then, a sound. Not quite a cry, more like a whimper dragged through snow, still alive. "Stay with me," she whispered, wrapping the kitten in her coat and holding him close to her chest. "Please just stay with me." The drive back was a blur of frost and focus. Her barn was ready, her supplies in place. She'd done this before, foxes, owls, one time even a black bear cub. But this one felt different. He didn't resist her touch. When she pressed him to her chest, he leaned in, weak but deliberate. She called him Ash. Partly for the smudge-like markings on his face, partly because he felt like something risen from the fire of loss. The first night was a battle. Incubator warmed to a careful 90 degrees. Fluids through a syringe. Formula so gentle it barely smelled like anything. Dana didn't sleep. She just listened. To his breathing. To the silence in between. Every time he stirred, she whispered, "Not yet, little one. Don't go just yet." At some point around 3 a.m., he let out a low chirp, strange and soft, and pawed blindly at her hand through the plastic wall of the incubator. Dana felt her throat catch. She didn't cry, not yet. But something inside her shifted. It would take her months to understand what that shift truly meant. Ash survived the night. By morning, his breathing had steadied, though his body still twitched now and then, like it wasn't quite convinced it was safe. Donna adjusted the heat lamp and swapped the formula for a tiny bottle designed for premature house kittens. He was too small for anything else. His eyes were still cloudy, pupils unsteady, but they followed her movements now. He didn't flinch when she touched him. That alone told her something had gone wrong. Wild bobcat kittens, even the young ones, didn't seek out warmth from humans. They hissed, scratched, hid. It was survival. But Ash had already crossed a line without even knowing it. That first night, when Dana had held him against her chest, her scent had become safety. Her voice had become familiarity. And for an animal meant to live alone in the woods, that was dangerous. Dana tried not to dwell on it. The job, as she always reminded herself, was to heal, not to hold on. But the lines were blurring quicker than she liked. Ash gained strength over the next week with a kind of quiet stubbornness. Every feeding, he suckled harder. His body filled out. The matted fur softened under warm compresses and gentle brushing. His eyes fully opened by day 8. Pale amber, rimmed with black, like twin sunsets on the verge of storm. He would watch Dana while she moved around the room. Not just glance. Watch, track, memorize. She told herself it was just instinct, but she knew better. One afternoon, while she was sterilizing feeding syringes, she heard a soft sound behind her. Not the chirp, not a growl. Something else. She turned to find Ash pressed against the side of the crate, both paws extended, his nose tilted upward. His body vibrated with a soft, deep purring that made no sense. "Oh no," Dana whispered. "Don't you start that. You're not a house cat." But he purred louder, and when she reached in to check his temperature, he curled his paw around her thumb. By week 3, the crate was no longer enough. Ash had begun trying to climb the walls, scrambling up the side like he was chasing something invisible. Dana moved him into a corner of her kitchen. Warmer, easier to monitor, and easier to clean. She set up a puppy playpen, lined with towels and soft blankets. At the center, she placed a small apple crate she'd kept from her childhood, still stamped with faded red letters from a long-closed orchard. Ash claimed it instantly, dragged a worn blanket inside, nested, and refused to leave it unless she lured him out with formula or gentle claps. He'd sleep in that box, blanket half-draped, paws twitching. Sometimes, in the deep of night, Dana would catch him crying. Not loudly, just a soft, keening sound that slipped through the house like smoke. One night, she knelt beside him and rested her hand near the edge. He crept out slowly, blanket in his mouth, and placed it on her knee like an offering. She didn't speak, just pressed her fingers to the top of his head where the fur was thick and warm, and stayed there until his breathing slowed. It was around this time she stopped saying he and started saying my boy. At the end of week 4, Donna brought in Dr. Mira Lane, a wildlife vet from Missoula who had seen her fair share of complicated cases. Mira examined Ash carefully, checking his teeth, reflexes, heartbeat. "Healthy?" she said, standing back. "Too healthy, maybe." Dana raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Mira sighed. "He's imprinted, hard. You can't undo this. He thinks you're his mother, or at least his world." Dana already knew it, but hearing someone say it aloud made the floor feel uneven. "If he doesn't learn to fear people," Mira continued, "he can't go back. Not safely. He'll approach the wrong person one day and that'll be it." "What's the alternative?" Dana asked. Mira looked at the box in the corner. Ash was peeking out, watching them. His head tilted like he understood every word. "You'll have to choose. sooner or later. That night, a storm rolled in over the mountains. Donna sat beside Ash's box with the lights low, thunder rumbling overhead. He crawled out slowly and lay beside her, one paw resting lightly on her ankle. No claws, just contact. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. But inside, it was just her and the wild thing who had never learned to be afraid of her. And that, she thought, might break her heart someday. By the start of the second month, Ash had outgrown the kitchen pen. He was bigger now, 10 pounds of sinewy energy, all muscle and curiosity. His coat had thickened, rosettes bold and defined. His paws were huge, too big for his legs, giving him an awkward, loping gait that made Dana laugh when he ran. But it wasn't just his size that was changing. He followed her. Not occasionally, not curiously, constantly. From the moment she stepped into the room, Ash was at her heels. If she sat at the table, he'd curl underneath it. If she stepped into the hallway, he'd cry at the door until she opened it again. At night, she tried to keep him in his corner with the crate and the blanket, but she'd wake to find him sleeping on the rug beside her bed. His breathing synced to hers. It was subtle at first, the way he mirrored her rhythm. But once she noticed, she couldn't unsee it. One morning, Donna opened her bedroom door and found Ash sitting there, perfectly still, his old blue blanket folded awkwardly in his mouth. He dropped it at her feet, looked up with wide, amber eyes, and chirped. Donna knelt slowly, her chest tightening. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why me?" He answered with a purr and rubbed his cheek against her knee. She tried to hold her boundaries. She reminded herself every day. Ash was not a pet. He was a bobcat. One day, she'd have to let him go. But the way he pressed his forehead to her calf, the way he waited for her to return from town like a loyal dog, the way his ears twitched at her voice, none of it felt temporary. The wooden apple crate became his kingdom. Dinah placed it in the sunniest part of the house, near the big front window. Ash would curl inside it during the afternoon hours, peering through the glass at the pine trees swaying outside. Sometimes, he'd make a soft, clicking sound when he saw birds, his body low and tail twitching like he was born for the hunt. But he never attacked. Not yet. To prepare him for the future she hoped he'd still have, Dana began introducing enrichment exercises. Puzzle feeders, scent trails, recordings of prey sounds. She set up climbing platforms in the barn, brought in live mice for hunting practice, ethically sourced and part of his rehabilitation protocol. Ash showed interest, even talent. He could stalk, leap, ambush with the precision of a natural predator. But once the session ended, he'd come looking for Dana, like it had all just been a game. There was a moment one evening, near dusk, that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She was standing on the porch, the sky turning gold and lavender, when Ash emerged from the barn with a slow, steady pace. In his mouth was a small rabbit, his first full catch. He dropped it gently at her feet and sat back on his haunches, chest puffed, tail curled around his paws. She looked at him, at his proud posture, at the flecks of blood on his chin, at the impossibly soft purring beneath the quiet. He didn't need praise. He needed to share. And in that moment, Dana understood the depth of the bond. Ash wasn't confused. He wasn't half wild, half tame. He was entirely himself, something in between, something new. But not everyone agreed. When she sent videos of his training sessions to Mira Lane, the vet's reply came sharp and immediate. "He's too attached, Dana. If you delay the decision, it's going to get worse. He'll get bigger, stronger, then what? You think he'll stay gentle forever?" Dana didn't respond right away. She watched Ash instead, sleeping near the hearth, blue blanket clutched in his claws, eyes closed but ears twitching to every sound she made. That night, she dreamed she was walking through the forest with him beside her. Not on a leash, not caged, just walking. As if the world had forgotten he was supposed to belong to it, and instead let him belong to her. She woke with tears drying on her cheeks. The emotional cliff came sooner than she thought. It happened on a Tuesday. She was out by the shed gathering firewood when a sharp screech ripped through the air. She dropped the logs and ran. Ash was in the backyard, body arched, fur fluffed, standing protectively in front of the porch stairs. A raccoon, massive, bold, had wandered too close. The two were locked in a stare down, neither willing to move. Donna froze, unsure whether to intervene. But before she could make a sound, Ash hissed, low and sharp, and charged. The raccoon backed off instantly, crashing through brush and disappearing into the woods. Ash stood panting, muscles taut, tail lashing. When Dana approached, he didn't growl. He turned toward her, chirped softly, then collapsed at her feet like the tension had bled right out of him. She knelt, running her hand along his back. He was trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Still, his eyes searched hers, asking for something she couldn't yet give. "You protected me," she whispered. "But who's going to protect you from me?" And in that single moment, she felt the weight of what love cost when it came wrapped in wildness. By the start of spring, Ash had grown into something magnificent. He was nearly 20 pounds now, his legs long and powerful, muscles rippling beneath his spotted coat. His ear tufts had filled out, and his tail, once stubby and awkward, now moved with purpose. To look at him was to see a wild animal in full bloom. But at home, within Dana's world, he still carried the softness of the kitten she'd pulled from the snow. He still slept with the blue blanket. He still chirped when she entered a room, and he had developed a new habit: guarding doors. It began subtly. He'd sit outside the bathroom when she showered. Then he started waiting by the front door every time she left to get feed or supplies. When she came back, he'd mule once, circle her legs, then return to his crate or box like his job was done. He'd also begun hoarding Dana's clothing, soft items mostly. A worn flannel shirt, an old knit hat. Once, a single wool sock disappeared for 3 days until she found it neatly folded beneath the blanket inside the apple crate. "You're a thief with terrible taste," she muttered with a smile. But deep down, she knew what it meant. These were his scent markers, his totems of safety. She'd seen wolves do the same, foxes too. But Ash was different. He wasn't just marking territory. He was trying to hold on. One morning, she found him curled in the box with the flannel shirt, purring so loud it made her chest ache. She knelt, brushed her hand over his spine, and whispered, "I don't know how I'm supposed to let you go." Ash pressed his head against her wrist and stayed like that for a long time. The conversations with Mira became more frequent, more urgent. There was a timeline Dana could no longer ignore. Ash would soon reach full size. If he didn't start distancing from her, the state would require a decision: rehabilitation or surrender. That night, she sat on the porch and stared into the trees, trying to imagine Ash out there, alone, hunting, surviving without the smell of her clothes or the safety of his box. She couldn't picture it. She didn't want to, but she tried. Then came the twist. It was late April. A storm had just passed through, leaving the woods slick with rain and the sky washed in fading silver. Dana had left the back door open a crack to air out the kitchen. She was inside boiling syringes when she heard the crash, not the usual kind. This wasn't a knocked-over crate or dropped bowl. This was heavy, final, like a tree limb falling. She sprinted to the living room and froze. Ash was on top of the tall bookcase, something he'd never done before. Books scattered everywhere. Picture frames shattered. But Ash wasn't moving. He was pressed against the wall, ears flat, tail puffed, growling in a tone she had never heard from him before. Then she saw what had caused it. Outside the window, on the porch railing, sat a massive feral tomcat. Scarred face, torn ear, eyes that carried the weight of 100 fights. He stared through the glass at Ash with a kind of casual menace, unmoving. Ash didn't leap, didn't charge. He trembled. Dana's heart broke as understanding bloomed. Ash had never learned how to be a bobcat. Not really. He didn't know the social codes, the power stances, the body language of the wild. He saw himself not as a predator, but something smaller, something unfinished. The chirping, the blanket, the stolen shirt. It wasn't just quirky behavior. It was survival. He didn't want dominance. He wanted safety. Dana slowly walked to the window. The tomcat glanced at her, then disappeared into the trees. She turned back to Ash. He had climbed down from the bookcase and now sat beside the crate, silent. His blanket half pulled over his paws. She knelt, reached out a hand. Ash pressed his head into her palm and let out a low, exhausted breath. No purr, no chirp. That night, Donna didn't sleep. She sat beside Ash's box while the wind returned to the valley. Her laptop glowed beside her. She typed late into the night, researching, calling in favors, sending emails to sanctuaries, wildlife educators, anyone who might help. Because she knew now, release wasn't an option. Ash would die in the wild. Not because he wasn't strong, but because the wild didn't know how to hold something that didn't quite belong. And neither, it seemed, did she. For 2 days, Dana barely left the house. Her mind looped through impossible choices. Every option carried its own kind of grief. She could try to rewild him, distance herself, let him live in the outer enclosure, feed him from a distance, train him to hunt more aggressively. But what would that teach him? Fear of the only voice he trusted? Confusion that the hands which once saved him now withdrew? Or she could surrender him to a wildlife facility. That meant cages, metal floors, strangers, a place where he would be seen but never touched, admired but never known. Mira's words echoed in her head. You'll have to choose, sooner or later. Ash, oblivious to the storm in her chest, carried on with his odd rituals. He spent hours in his box, rearranging the blue blanket, sometimes dragging in new treasures, a pine cone, a scrap of paper, once even Dana's glove. Every night he waited at the front door until she locked it, then curled up near her chair by the window. The third evening, Tom Becker dropped by unannounced. His truck rumbled into the driveway as the sun bled red over the ridges. He knocked once and entered like he always did, with that unspoken courtesy of small towns. He saw the Bobcat first. Well, I'll be damned, he said softly, pulling off his hat. You weren't kidding, were you? He really thinks he owns the place. Ash, instead of running or growling, walked right up to him, sniffed his boot, and chirped. Tom chuckled. Friendly little demon, ain't he? Dana smiled, though her eyes were tired. Friendly, yes. Little, not anymore. Tom studied her face for a long moment. You look like someone who hasn't slept in a week. I haven't, she admitted. I'm running out of options. He's too tame to release, too wild to keep. The state's breathing down my neck. Tom nodded slowly, then glanced around the room. His gaze landed on the wooden crate by the wall, the one with the old blue blanket spilling out. "I got land up north," he said. "More than I can use. My granddaughter Lila, she's studying veterinary science down in Bozeman. She told me about these programs, where they keep animals like him. Too human for the wild, too wild for homes, and let folks see them, learn from them. Wildlife outreach, therapy stuff, that sort of thing." Dana tilted her head. "Ambassador programs? They take years to get off the ground, Tom. Permits, funding, inspections, and land," he interrupted gently, "which I got. You've got the knowledge. Lila can handle the paperwork. Maybe it's time we built something new, instead of just letting things die the way they always have." She didn't answer at first. She was staring at Ash, who was now trying to fit himself into a shoebox under the table, tail twitching in comedic frustration. The sight made her smile despite herself. "You really think people would want to meet him?" she asked finally. Tom leaned against the counter. "People love stories that make them believe again. You've got a bobcat that sleeps with a blanket. That's hope with fur on it. Yeah, they'll come." The idea rooted in her chest like a seed she didn't realize she'd been waiting for. That night, Donna didn't sit by the fire. She sat by her computer, writing grant letters, filling out state forms, drafting proposals. She called Mira, who agreed to help with the veterinary certifications. Tom promised to start clearing land for an enclosure by the next week. Still, fear gnawed at her. She'd seen how fragile animals like Ash could be, how fast things could fall apart when humans got too close. And yet, as she worked through the night, she felt something she hadn't in months: purpose. At dawn, when the first light cut through the trees, Ash crawled out of his crate. He yawned, stretched, and walked over to her. He dropped his blanket at her feet, then climbed halfway into her lap, pressing his head into her arm. She laughed softly, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "You have the worst timing," she whispered. "But maybe you're right." A week later, construction began. The sound of hammers and saws echoed through the valley. Ash didn't like the noise. He'd hide behind furniture, tail low, eyes wide. At night, he'd curl against Dana, trembling until the house went quiet. She kept the blanket near, always. Then, one evening as the sky turned indigo, thunder rolled in from the west. The storm cracked over the ridgeline, shaking the windows. Ash leapt up, pacing in tight circles. Dana reached out and whispered, "It's okay, baby. It's just a storm." He crawled beside her on the floor, pressed his paw over her chest, and stayed there until the thunder faded. That was when she knew she'd made her decision, not from logic or law, but from that silent gesture. That paw. That shared heartbeat. Ash would never be returned to the wild. He would build something new instead, a space between worlds where love and wildness could coexist, even if only for a while. By midsummer, the enclosure was nearly complete. Tom's land had transformed. What was once overgrown pasture now held a secure, sprawling habitat, shaded by ponderosa pines and birch. At the center stood a climate-controlled shelter, half buried into a slope for insulation. There were climbing logs, rocks, platforms at varying heights, and a small pool for hot afternoons. And, of course, Dana made sure it included something Ash would recognize. An assortment of wooden crates stacked near a sun-drenched wall, each one lined with pieces of his blue blanket. Permits came through slowly, piece by piece. Mira handled the animal welfare side. Lila, Tom's granddaughter, drove in from Bozeman every weekend to help with paperwork and plans for the outreach center. The state required observation protocols, fencing inspections, and backup veterinary coverage. Donna handled it all, moving through every hurdle with the quiet desperation of someone who knew there was no plan B. Ash watched the construction from the living room window. He'd sit for hours, tail flicking, head tilted, eyes narrowed. He didn't understand yet, but he would. He was more restless now, more aware. He paced more often, scratched at doors that were once ignored. At night, he'd still curl up beside her on the rug, but he didn't settle as easily. Sometimes he cried in his sleep, short, sharp sounds like he was chasing something he couldn't catch. Donna tried not to let it break her, but some nights she'd sit beside him, hand resting on his back, and whisper, "Soon, my boy. Just hold on. We're almost there." The final inspection came on a cloudless Tuesday. Dinah and Lila walked the site with two officials from the wildlife department. Ash remained at home under Mira's watch, unaware that his future was being decided over clipboards and signatures. The lead inspector, a lean man with a weathered face and a quiet way of speaking, paused near the fence line and asked, "And this Bobcat, he's safe around people?" Dana hesitated. "He's still wild, but he's gentle. He doesn't lash out. We'll have a reinforced viewing area, no direct contact." The inspector watched her for a long moment, then nodded. "We've seen worse. A lot worse. And this setup's better than most." They signed the papers that afternoon. Dana drove home in silence. The gravel crunched beneath the tires, the sun casting long shadows across the mountains. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw Ash waiting at the door, his blanket clutched in his jaws. That night, she sat on the floor with him, blanket folded between them, and told him everything. About the land, the new home, the center they were building. She spoke slowly, as if he might understand every word. And maybe he did. Because the next morning, for the first time, Ash didn't follow her into the kitchen. He stayed in his crate. Dana stood in the doorway and watched him. He looked up once, blinked slowly, then turned his head toward the window. The move happened quietly. Ash's crate, with the blanket inside, was placed in the truck bed. Dana rode in the back with him, one hand resting through the bars. The drive was only 40 minutes, but it felt like crossing continents. When they arrived, she opened the enclosure gate and set the crate inside. Ash stepped out cautiously, sniffing the grass, ears swiveling. Then he saw the stack of crates and walked straight toward them. He picked the middle one, climbed in, and disappeared from view. Dana felt her chest cave in with relief. Over the next few days, he adjusted. He explored every corner. He learned the paths, climbed every platform, splashed his paws in the pool. He seemed content. Not joyous, not exuberant, but steady, grounded. Like the part of him that had always felt unsure had finally found a rhythm. The public wasn't allowed in just yet, but Dana and Lila prepared for it. They decorated the education center, added displays on local predators, environmental stewardship, bobcat biology. Donna included a wall titled Ash's Story, with photos from his first weeks, the blue blanket folded in a shadow box. Ash continued his rituals. He brought leaves and sticks to the front of the enclosure, lining them in neat piles. He chirped when Dana arrived each morning. He'd sit by the fence, watching her from a distance, ears forward. But he didn't cry at night anymore. And that's how she knew. He was letting go, in his own way. The first official visit came from a local veterans group. A small audience, just 6 people, all quiet, all older. Dana stood at the observation window, telling Ash's story with slow, careful words. She talked about the snow, the blanket, the box. And as she spoke, Ash padded forward. He didn't pace or posture. He sat down near the window, stared at the group, and slowly blinked. One of the veterans, a man in his 60s with deep scars on his hands, leaned forward and whispered, "He's just like I was. Didn't know where I fit." Dana smiled softly. "He fits right here now." After the session, when everyone had left and the air was still again, Ash walked over to Dana's side of the enclosure. He pressed his forehead to the barrier, a quiet acknowledgement. No chirp, no cry, just presence. And that was enough. Summer bled into autumn. The trees around the outreach center exploded in amber and gold, the mountain air turning crisp in the mornings and smoky with wood fire at dusk. Ash adjusted to the seasonal change the way he did everything. Slowly, silently, on his own terms. Dana visited every morning, rain or shine. She'd sit on the bench by the viewing panel with a thermos of coffee in hand, watching Ash climb to the top of the highest platform or curl up in his favorite wooden crate. He always acknowledged her with a soft blink, sometimes with a chirp, sometimes with nothing more than a pause in his steps. That was enough. The education program had taken off in ways Dana hadn't expected. Schools from 3 counties booked visits. Retired teachers volunteered to help. Lila handled logistics, funding, and outreach. And Ash became the heartbeat of it all. Children drew pictures of him. Veterans returned just to sit and watch him breathe. One boy who hadn't spoken since a traumatic loss began to whisper stories to Ash through the glass. A teenager battling anxiety volunteered to help clean the viewing area, claiming Ash made her feel safe, like he gets it. But one day, Dana saw something that shook her more than any of the early days. It was near closing time. A storm had rolled in, echoing the one from the spring before. The center had cleared out early. Donna stayed behind to secure equipment when she glanced out and saw Ash in the far corner of the enclosure. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't climbing. He was sitting stone still, facing the woods. Tail still. Ears perfectly upright. The sky darkened and the first drops of rain began to fall. Then came a low, raw sound. An animal cry that seemed to rise from the bottom of his chest. It wasn't loud, but it was mournful. Dana froze. She watched as he tilted his head to the sky, eyes narrowed, and let out the cry again. Not fear, not pain. Grief. She walked outside, keeping her distance, calling his name gently as the rain began to soak her sleeves. He turned toward her then, lowered his head, and walked to the viewing glass. He pressed his forehead to it for the briefest moment before returning to his crate. When Dana came back inside, Mira was waiting by the door. "He's remembering something," Mira said quietly. "That's what that cry is. Something deep. Maybe the storm. Maybe his mother. Maybe it's not for us to understand." Dana nodded, wiping rain from her cheek. "I just want him to know he's not alone." "He does," Mira replied. "That's why he called for you." The next morning, Dana brought an old photo to the center, one she'd never shown anyone. It was Ash, barely a month old, curled up inside her jacket on that first day, blue blanket peeking out beneath his chin. She taped it to the wall inside the education room, beside a child's crayon drawing of Ash chasing leaves. Life had folded into itself. Grief, joy, survival, memory, all tangled up in the shape of a cat that refused to be one thing or the other. On Ash's 1-year anniversary at the center, they held a quiet celebration. No balloons, no crowds. Just the staff, a handful of long-time visitors, and a bucket of new blankets, freshly stitched in sky blue flannel. Dana placed one near the crate. Ash walked up, sniffed it once, and laid down on top without hesitation. As everyone watched, he stretched, rolled onto his back, paws in the air, and purred so loud it vibrated through the fence. "He's happy," Lila whispered, holding her camera just out of sight. "He's home," Dana replied. And that night, after the last guest had gone and the lights were dimmed, Dana returned one last time before heading home. She stood by the fence, hand resting on the edge, watching Ash bat gently at a twig floating in his pool. He saw her, trotted over, and dropped the twig at her feet like a gift. Then he sat, blinking slowly, tail curling beside him. Dana whispered, "Thank you, Ash, for choosing to stay." He didn't chirp, he didn't purr. He just leaned his massive body against the barrier, pressing his side to the space nearest her. They stayed like that for a long time. Two souls who had survived the wild in different ways, neither fully healed, but no longer broken. Winter returned with soft footsteps, first as mist clinging to the grass, then as frost on window panes, and finally as snow, drifting gently down from the mountain peaks like it had 3 years before. It was the kind of snow that muffled the world, made everything feel paused, sacred. Dana stood at the edge of Ash's enclosure, bundled in her old wool coat, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. She watched as Ash circled his space, tail high, ears twitching. He was heavier now, solid with muscle and confidence. But there was still something boyish in the way he chased the snowflakes, leaping to catch one mid-air before landing in a dramatic roll. He darted toward the crates stacked in the corner, dove into one with an impossible twist of his body, and emerged a second later with a scrap of blue blanket in his jaws. Dana laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're still ridiculous," she murmured. Inside the education center, the bulletin board overflowed with visitor drawings. Crayon sketches of a bobcat with big ears and big eyes, usually surrounded by boxes or curled up with a blanket. Some had hearts drawn above his head. Others just said, in shaky handwriting, "Thank you, Ash." There were photos too. A veteran smiling beside the viewing panel, a young girl holding her own blue blanket like it was sacred. A group of teenagers posing with a cardboard sign that read, "Ash is my therapy." Dana pinned a new photo to the board, one of Ash and her, both slightly blurred in motion. She was kneeling by the fence, and Ash was mid-blink, his paw lifted like he was waving. No caption, none needed. Later that evening, after the last school group had gone and the wind had picked up, Dana returned one more time. She did this often, not out of duty, but out of ritual. Ash greeted her at the gate, dropping a pine cone at her feet as if it were treasure. She stepped into the interaction nook, a small safe zone built into the fence line, sat on the bench, and waited. Ash came close, laid down, and pressed his side to the barrier. Dana reached through the slot and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. The snow was starting again, slow, delicate flakes melting into the thick fur behind his neck. For a while, they just breathed, shared breath. No words, no sounds. Just the steady rhythm of trust between two beings who had never meant to find each other, but had. She thought about that first morning, the phone call, the freezing kitten, the desperate fight to keep him alive. She remembered the trembling body, the impossibly soft purring, the blue blanket cradled like a lifeline. She thought about what it meant to be wild, and what it meant to choose love anyway. Ash blinked slowly. Then, with deliberate care, he reached a massive paw through the slot and rested it on her chest. Dana's breath caught. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't need. It was recognition. And in that moment, surrounded by falling snow and fading light, she understood. He wasn't hers to keep, but he was hers to know. And maybe that was enough. The next morning, the center opened its doors as usual. Children laughed. Stories were shared. and a new blue blanket was placed in Ash's favorite crate. He climbed inside, turned 3 slow circles, and settled down. Outside, a chickadee sang from the treetop, and the snow continued to fall, soft and endless. In that quiet, Dinah smiled. Because some stories don't need an ending. Some stories just need to be held.